Final Fantasy has been one of my favorite franchises for a very long time, and every generation it seems that handhelds become Final Fantasy machines, with the Switch being the craziest of the bunch. We already had 7, 8, 9, 10, and 12, and we finally got the pixel remasters of 1 through 6, and that's what we're going to talk about today. As a collection rather than one by one, here is my review of the Final Fantasy Pixel Remasters for the Nintendo Switch. With story, all of these games are separated but really boil down to being fantasy adventures where a select number of warriors travel the world aiming to save it from an evil threat, be it one that has already conquered the world or trying to prevent catastrophe. These games have different levels of storytelling as well. The earlier games don't have a lot of plot to them, like the original Warriors of Light being mute, but the further they go, the more intricate the storylines got. All the way to the crazy character moments in 4 and the very charismatic interactions mid-battle in 6. These are all pretty good stories, even in the original game with as little story as there is. When it comes to gameplay, these are 6 turn-based RPGs in a very retro sense, though technically that's the wrong term. These aren't new games trying to be retro, but actual titles from that retro age. Now first of all, let's talk about the Pixel Remasters and what's unique about the console version on Switch and PlayStation 4. These remasters were basically remade in a Super Nintendo-esque engine with new sprites and more streamlined systems. Each game has its own original mechanics, but they're all using the same kind of format with menus, how auto battle works, and even the result in level up screens. But there is a downside to these remasters. Square made these not to be ultimate definitive editions, but recreations of the original experience, graphics aside. All content is based on the original incarnations of Final Fantasy 1 through 6, meaning that all the extra stuff we got on the GBA, PSP, PS1, mobile, it was all omitted from this release. We have updated scripts, a remastered soundtrack, and handy little features like auto battle, but all of that extra stuff from previous incarnations were removed. And then let's get into the console version, because Switch and PS4 have new features that the PC version currently doesn't have. On console, you can toggle between the remix or original soundtracks, modern and older font for text, and boosting, letting you add multipliers to experience, money, and some of the game's specific mechanics, as well as turning off random encounters. This can be used for a variety of different gamers. Turn up multipliers to speed up grinding, turn off encounters to avoid those nasty instant kill enemies from Final Fantasy II, or reduce experience and money to create a hardcore challenge. But let's get to the games themselves. Each of them are pretty simple. You travel an overworld, fight off monsters and bosses on an adventure to save the world, have a party of characters with different abilities, and go on little sub-quests on your task. It's the classic RPG formula from some of the games that defined that formula. And before moving on, there are little changes from individual titles for those interested. To cite a couple examples, Final Fantasy I's Earth Cavern had its encounter rate lowered, the drop rates for Final Fantasy IV's Secret Summons is a lot better than previous ports, the Blitz command in Final Fantasy VI will now display the input every time you do them instead of making you memorize each button combination, not to mention the ability to turn off 6's nauseating pseudo 3D movement with chocobos or airships, giving us a proper 2D way of using those vehicles. And most importantly, the entirety of Final Fantasy III is based on the original NES game and not the heavily altered 3D remake. The Pixel Remaster is, to my knowledge, the first time the original version of 3 has been released in English, giving us the Onion Kids instead of Luneth, Arc, Raphia, and Ingus. The thing I like about these games, Pixel Remaster or not, are how each title introduced different mechanics and feels different but also the same. Final Fantasy I had the magic use system and a very explore to figure things out because we aren't going to tell you what to do adventure. 2 had that wonky proficiency system of only leveling things you use a lot, kind of like what the Elder Scrolls used in its later games. 3 and 5 had class systems that change characters into whatever you want them to be, and 4 and 6 had the crazy and constantly ramping up stories and subplots of party members getting separated and going on different adventures. Granted, some of these systems are a bit dated and take getting used to, especially in those first 3 titles, but the enhancements in these remasters help with that. The boosting reduces the amount of grinding you have to do, and we have an incredibly smart auto battle system. Not only does auto battle fight for you, but it isn't like other RPGs where it just makes every party member do normal attacks. It'll remember the last command you used for each character, repeating them similar to the auto battle system from Final Fantasy IV The Complete Collection on the PlayStation Portable. This way you can set up your own preset, like having someone heal, someone cast magic, and 2 others attack, and do a much smarter auto battle to passively grind. It'll even remember input-based commands like Sabin's blitz attacks and do the skills without you having to manually do the input. Granted, this doesn't make the dated mechanics any less dated, it just helps with the experience if you haven't encountered these games before. And with all of this in mind, you're still getting a decent amount of content and length. Boosting will lower the amount of time for each game, but even the shortest of the bunch, being Final Fantasy I at around 15 to 16 hours, boosting will still net you at least 12 of those hours out of these games. While some people aren't terribly happy with the pricing at $12 to $18 per title, you do still get a good amount of time per adventure. Next up is presentation. Visually, these games look great. It was built on a retro style, so don't expect the crazy modernized sprites from the PlayStation Portable ports of 1, 2, and 4, but they look pretty good for what they are. These games are very colorful and look absolutely beautiful on the Switch's OLED screen. But let's get into performance, because the Pixel remasters weren't exactly perfect even on PC. Lots of stuttering and screen tearing, and some of that is still here. Many of the cinematics have random stutters that slow them down, and moving through dungeons can do the same in pretty much all of these titles. It happens more often here than PC, where you will be running along and the game will stutter for a second and continue. It's not a huge deal, but seeing dungeons stutter a lot and not run smoothly is very weird both here and on PC. These aren't exactly new 2D RPGs. Square's remastered these plenty of times with smooth results. Them not getting a perfectly smooth experience across PC, Switch, or PS4 is beyond weird. Next up is battery life. The Final Fantasy Pixel remasters get 3 to 4 hours out of the original model, the Lite gets 4 to 5 hours, the V2 gets 6 to 7, and the OLED gets 6.5 to 8 hours. And for the sake of comparison, if you pop over to the Steam Deck, these games will get about 4.5 to 5 hours of battery life, right on par with the Nintendo Switch Lite, but a good couple hours shorter than the V2 and OLED Switch models. Now as we wrap this up, the Pixel remasters finally bring the original 6 Final Fantasy titles back to handhelds, giving the Switch 12 of the 16 mainline games on the go. On the downside, we still have occasional stutters like the PC version. Not having any of the extra content from the newer ports is a bit of a bummer, but the extra boost and music features of the console version make it essentially the definitive version of these remasters, at least until PC gets updated with these extra features. But regardless, these are 6 great fantasy adventures that any JRPG fan should experience, even if just once. Reviews to Go rates the Final Fantasy Pixel remasters for the Nintendo Switch an 8.5 out of 10. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below. Thank you for watching, and have a great day.